Well, in some ways it's ironic that I'm going to be here giving this talk on Timothy, because I was a Leary basher myself when I first got interested in psychedelic drugs. I had the naive view, I think, then that universities were going to permit psychedelic drug research when I got re-involved in the subject in the early 80s. And I was very involved. As you see, these two books are what I call the right wing of the psychedelic movement. This is sort of the antithesis of the approach that Tim took. And the last time I was in Switzerland, I was invited by Albert Hofmann to the 50th anniversary of LSD, which was put on by Sandoz and the Swiss Academy of Medicine. And that conference began with the president of the Swiss Academy first praising the scientific possibilities of LSD. And then he said, but unfortunately, LSD fell into the hands of esoterics and hippies. And I thought, I'm in the wrong conference, because it had seemed to me that the esoterics and the hippies rather made the most of the stuff. And it was right after that conference that I went down to Los Angeles to visit Tim. And there I saw a very different man. I must say I fell in love with him at that point. There was just a quality of presence and kind of magnetism and authenticity that I hadn't really seen in another human being. And so I started to hang out with him more and more, and I decided at that point to collect this volume of essays so that history would have a chance to evaluate him in the eyes of the people that knew him and loved him the most. Now, I left my home in California a few days ago to come here, and I deliberately didn't really prepare my remarks. I wanted to kind of sense the mood. I didn't know if I was going to be, how many psychiatrists were going to be here, and I wanted to just be spontaneous and share a tribute to Timothy with whoever showed up. And I'm wondering what I'm going to say as I'm driving up the beautiful coast of California into San Francisco, where I parked my car and I thought of Haight-Ashbury and the power and the how fantastic that period was. And then I had to get a plane from San Francisco to Dallas, and I thought, Dallas, that's sort of the opposite of San Francisco. And I thought, the George Bush, and I got on the plane and. I thought maybe I'll be lucky, no one will sit next to me. A few minutes later, a very straight-looking Dallas businessman comes and sits next to me, and I think this is going to be a long flight. And he says, "Where are you going?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to Switzerland." And he says, "Why?" And I said, "Well, a friend of mine is having a birthday party." And I thought, well, I'll go a little further. I says, his name is Albert Hofmann, and he's the discoverer of LSD. And he looked at me and he said, I thought Timothy Leary discovered LSD. And I said, it's funny because I'm going to be giving a talk about Timothy, but really it was Albert Hofmann that discovered LSD. And he looked at me and he says, "Oh, that's right." He says, no, Leary just figured out what to do with it. And I said, "Yeah, well, that's right." And then he said, "So what are you going to say?" And I said, "Well, I really don't know yet. I was just going to, kind of sense the mood." And he said, "Well, why don't you just put LSD in the punch, and then you won't have to say anything." I thought that was pretty perfect in Dallas, and it reminded me of a few times that I've been with Tim. I remember picking him up at the airport in San Francisco on the day that Jerry Garcia died. And just walking from the plane to my car, a very straight-looking guy in a business suit in the San Francisco airport came up to him and said, "You're Timothy Leary?" And he said, "Yes." The guy got down on his knees in the airport in San Francisco and he said, I owe my life to you." He said, "You taught me the power of my own mind." And Timothy was very modest, and we moved on. And the next night we were having dinner in Half Moon Bay, and the same thing happened. This time it was a man with a ponytail came up to him and said the same thing. Several months later, when this book was, I had just about finished typing it all up, and my computer crashed. And I had to take it to get the drive restored, and it was very expensive. It cost about $800 to pull this information off. I had 3 years worth of work, typing this up. And when the man there found out that it was a book on Timothy Leary, he said, "I'm not going to charge you for this, and that was fantastic. So I'm driving back from the place in Novato, California, and my car breaks down. I have to get towed. And I get in with the tow truck driver, and I said, this has just been a bad week for me and machines. And I told him this story. And he said, "Timothy Leary? You knew Timothy Leary? No charge for this." So I figure this is terrific. I go, on the way back to Santa Cruz, I stopped in San Francisco at a law firm. There was a party. Tony Serra was having a party. And I had some documents from Tim's archives, some of the court papers. And I went into Tony's office and I was starting to show them to people. And when they found out that I had material from Leary's archives, one guy was so pissed off that I was going to, come into this thing with Timothy Leary was a nemesis, and they just absolutely hated Timothy Leary. And it was just... Soon after that, I was crossing the street with my son, and who was 7 years old at the time, and he said, "Dad, why was Timothy so famous anyway? What did he do? Free the slaves or something?" I mean, Timothy is, I had some concern when I was going to come here to talk about him because he's such a divisive character. And that fear was magnified when I looked at the New York Times article that came out just as I was flying here. It's about Albert Hofmann and his 100th birthday. And it's a fairly appreciative article, except for the fact that they keep calling Albert Mr. Hofmann in a slightly pejorative way. But it's a pretty decent article for the New York Times until you get to the very couple of last lines. And the article says that Albert thought that what Timothy did, popularizing LSD, was a crime. And here I was first thinking that it's going to be quite an honor to come here and to talk about Timothy, but now I'm faced with having to disagree with my old friend Albert on his birthday, on his 100th birthday, about this. And so I talked to Albert, and Albert was very, very upset because that's not at all what he said about Timothy. This is the New York Times putting words in his mouth. So you see this divisiveness, and Timothy is so, identified with, among the counterculture with the magnificence of this, but also by the establishment as the demon here. So I don't think I can really add to any of the brilliance that Marty Lee and Michael Horowitz and Simone have said already, and Sue Hall about Tim and the counterculture. So I just want to add the words of another great poet. When I was doing this festschrift, I made a phone call to the Grateful Dead, and Robert Hunter, Jerry's lyricist, came up with this off the top of his head. "But alas, I was no swimmer, so I lost my Clementine. Galileo said there's a sucker born every minute and two to lead him. Mark Twain claimed, give me a lever long enough, a fulcrum and a place to stand, and I'll talk to the moon. But it took Timothy Leary to demonstrate the insight that joined these divergent strains of thought, to wit, moderation in some things, excess in others. Tall boat, soft oars, crocheted sails in flat wind. Over the waves we wade while Tim in a tunic reasons with the breeze. Okay, your turn to blow, it says to him. Since someone had to mislead us, seeing the ice was thick and the skates thin, Tim was a better choice by the width of a bucket of blood than those who told us barrels only come out of the freedom of guns. Leary led us to understand freedom is in our socks because they're closer to our feet than our shoes. Now and forever, immortality calls, in the only way it calls, if in fact it calls, and it may behoove us to believe it does, since the fate of one is the fate of all. Or were we wrong about everything, including the clear evidence of the senses, standing on stalks where the wind talks, always in song, sweet little 16 in fluorescent jeans, bringing in the sheaves through the cornucopia of flagrant desire, chaste mermaids in halter tops, tipping each wave, singing for some, Tim among them. Those who choose the perils of freedom over the certainties of stone alone may hear them. Melodic variation aside, translation gainsaid, ever and anon, it's the same song. Gate, gate, in at the gate, out of the same gate, buddy, sail on. Now, I became interested in LSD when I was about 11 or 12 years old in 5th grade, and I was on the cover of Life magazine in 1967, and I went into my teacher and I said, so what is this? What is LSD? What does it stand for? And she said, let's save democracy. Well, and it's taken me 40 years to really figure out what she meant. But if you look at, I think it's important to look at Timothy Leary's social experiment of popularizing LSD in the context of 1940s and 50s social scientists who were very concerned with the problem of authoritarianism. You know, it's just on the heels of World War II, the horror of World War II, and to try to understand the dynamics of fascism and authoritarianism. And now, if you think about the political spectrum, and on the one hand you have democracy, and on the other side you have authoritarianism. In a fascist or authoritarian society, you have a body politic that projects their power onto the leader. It's exactly the opposite in a democratic society, where you have a body politic of self-aware individuals who are self-governing, and the leader basically follows the people. And Tim and Frank Barron, you know, whenever you talk about Timothy Leary, you also have to talk about Frank Barron, who was his best friend and mentor, and I was lucky enough to be his student for quite a few years. And they had devoted their careers as social scientists to tackling this problem of authoritarianism. And Tim's first body of research as a psychologist was to show that psychotherapy worked better if you took the psychotherapist out of it. Frank was more interested in creativity and particularly motivated by the atomic bomb, and was aware that humanity needed some kind of correlative increase in wisdom and compassion and intelligence to counter this savage potential of the atomic bomb. You know, we always talk about how there's this balance in nature, that the LSD was discovered and then right after the atomic age. And in the case of Tim and his popularizing LSD, this wasn't an accident or a synchronicity. This was a planned experiment. You know, as Ralph Metzner so powerfully and beautifully put it yesterday, you know, they got these drugs at Harvard, and they very quickly set out to show the relative safety, the importance of set and setting, the bona fide religious properties of them. The more they did this, and the curative potential in terms of the prison project, and instead of Harvard embracing them, the more clear they got on their research, the more Harvard actually became antagonistic. And so that's the point where Tim just decided to, you know, shift this thing into high gear and stand on the rooftops and shout as loud as he could. He was fully aware that there were going to be some casualties, but he thought that the importance of seeding a generation, particularly coming from Harvard, was worth the risk. And I don't, as Dieter had said when I was discussing doing this, he said, Timothy is a divisive character, but if it wasn't for Timothy, we wouldn't even be having a conference like this. So there are some special guests here that I want to bring up that had a very close relationship with Timothy. I first want to read this. This is the first time this has ever been read. Michael just gave it to me here. This was written by Tim in prison. Incredible man, to be in prison the way he was and to write 5 books while he was there. This is called A Child's Primer of Neurologics. A is for alcohol, emotics are crude. B is for barbiturates, stuporous and rude. C is for cocaine, it's sexy like ice. D is for dexterix, you manipulate nice. E means ecstatics, full speed for your brain. F means you're free to choose pleasure or pain. G is for genetics, dark wisdom of death. H is for hashish, a rapturous breath. I is for imprint, neural birth of your eyes. Joanna is woman, the queen of the skies. K means you know that your brain runs the show. L accelerates faster than most minds can go. Marijuana's sweet oils for your body's delight. Narcotics a trip to the shadows of night. Opiates offer untold lives you can lose. Peyotes an ecstatic the Indians choose. It's like Dr. Seuss. Cues for the quest, immortality's key. Rapturix can make your whole body feel free. Sexotics are drugs that will turn on your lust. Time can be stretched, as A. Einstein discussed. Use for unused the right side of your pate. Velocity, you experience more the faster your rate. Woman's the half that makes half man the sum. X, Y, and Z, the mysteries to come. If you understand this neurological dodgerel, you are free to be responsible. I do want to bring up these guests, but I want to also call your attention, without bringing too much darkness into this fantastic conference, but for those of you that have not read Timothy's last book, I want to call your attention to a particular essay he wrote in here on the psychology of fascism.
What's the title?
The book is called Chaos in Cyberculture, but the essay in particular is called Just Say No, the Eternal Antidote to Fascism. Thank you. It's as if he's writing the playbook for the neocons. So without any further ado, Timothy's popularizing LSD wouldn't have happened without a good, solid source of LSD. He wrote to Sandoz and tried to order some, and they said no. So the psychedelic movement, the popularization, the movement that we all love and that we all, I think, feel has tremendous survival value for this humanity, wouldn't have happened without a man who's become a very dear friend of mine. So please welcome Nick Sand, one of the foremost chemists in our psychedelic time. Push that.
Just say anything.
Whatever you want to say now.
Hi. Nice to see you all here. It's quite an exciting event. Is this working?
You have to keep your hand on.
Can you hear me now? I would just like to thank Bob for bringing me here. If it hadn't been for his encouragement, I wouldn't probably have come here after 10 or 11 years of supervision and prison. I've become a little bit of a hermit, and I was in prison because I helped the League for Spiritual Discovery by providing, under the tutelage of Owsley, a very pure form of LSD for decades, which caused me to go underground for 30 years, prison for 6, parole for another 5. I'm free now, finally. I didn't always get along that well with Timothy, but Timothy had a quicksilver wit, and if it wasn't for his courage and his willingness, along with mine, he was the man who fronted my work and stimulated my work, along with Owsley, who kicked me in the ass to provide the purest LSD on the planet. It's very important because of the toxic programming that we all have, where one can, in one context, kill someone, and it's murder, and in another, it's a virtue, such as in warfare. So when I took LSD, I began to realize we were all made of light. And this light we transform into dreams. And the dreams are the dreams of our lives and who we are and how we manifest ourselves. And we can choose by intention the dream we want. And I think this conference is about making the choice for turning ourselves from light into a dream we would like to have, and not the nightmare that many of us are seeing happen all around us right now.
Mm-hmm. Why don't you stay right here? Stay here. So also, a person that, before I came out here, I spent about 2 hours in Tim's archives, which are housed in Santa Cruz, California, and I say that is one of the richest repositories of this amazing history of psychedelic drugs, and the person that is solely responsible really for collecting and maintaining those archives, hiding them from the FBI, spending a month in jail when subpoenaed by the FBI to testify about Leary, and my dear friend and biblio brother Michael Horowitz, please come on up here.
I actually didn't spend a month in jail to avoid the subpoena. I spent it on a pot-growing commune in Mendocino County.
It was a house arrest?
No. I was hiding out. Bob's opening comments reminded me that some of the best moments around Tim were to be with him when people, complete strangers, came up to him. I had when I heard about from him, he told me that when he, back in, must have been 63, when he was becoming a national celebrity, and still a Harvard professor, he jumped into a cab. He was giving a lecture in New York City or somewhere like that, and he was already a bit of a celebrity, and the cab driver told him that, "Oh, you're Dr. Leary. I was the first subject in the very first LSD experiment in the United States. That happened in 1949 when a doctor named Max Wrinkle got the first LSD from Sandoz and brought it over here and started experimenting with people. And he was the very first. And Tim thought that was fantastic, but then he realized the guy was like a cab driver. And he asked him what he was doing with his life, and the guy said, "Well, I'm still living with my mother." And that's when Tim realized that, or Tim knew that, it's how important set and setting is when you take LSD. But this guy took LSD with Max Wrinkle instead of Timothy Leary. And I was with Tim in sometime in the 80s after a lot had gone down. And it was also coming back from a talk, or going to a talk, and I was driving him, and we were walking to the car, and somebody came up, somebody shouted out at Tim, came up to him and shouted to him, "You ruined the 60s." And when Tim didn't miss a beat, he immediately shot back, "I didn't realize they were ruined." Anyway, thanks for...
So, yeah,
That's it.
Thank you. Well, that's not it. We still have some time here, and I think there are probably a number of people that have some things they want to say about Tim. So let's open this up and see what kind of discussion we can have, what kind of interaction we can have. Not just you asking us questions, but if someone says something that someone else wants to answer, let's see if we can have some organized anarchy here. Please.
I just wanted to ask, when's the film coming out about Timothy Leary?
Which one?
The one that should be made. Whenever.
There's about 3 of them. They're not quite in production. They're in pre-production. They're all
Stay
Hollywood
tuned.
movies right now, so we don't know what to expect. Tim was he was a consultant on Skidoo, the Otto Preminger film, and Preminger wanted to take LSD to prepare himself for the movie, and Tim set it up, but the Preminger needed his entire entourage and as a result, Preminger had a bad trip, but he made a very funny movie, which is very hard to find, Skidoo, in which Groucho Marx plays God, and Jackie Gleason takes acid in prison.
We were. I remember one evening we were sitting around with Tim in his bedroom and discussing who was going to play him in the movie of his life. And were you there? Winona was there. Oliver Stone. It was a crowd there, and throwing out names. And finally, Tim says, "Look," he says, "really, it's kind of masturbatory for me to even be thinking about it. And besides, if I can't be played by Grace Jones in drag, who comes on to Richard Alpert, then really I don't give a fuck."
The first time I read about LSD was Cary Grant in Time magazine, 1954.
Yeah.
He said how beautiful it was. And I don't know, of course, where he got this LSD from. But you should read his books. High Priest, his first trips, with Allen Ginsberg, with other people. Beautiful, beautiful text. I translated into Dutch his Confessions of a Dopefiend, this incredible escape along a telephone falls from prison with the weatherman. Incredible. I love the man. I still love him, and I'm glad we are here.
Here.
The title of the book Simone just mentioned was actually Confessions of a Hope Addict.
Confessions of a Hope I Timothy in Switzerland while he was on the run. I was with him most of the time when he escaped, because we went over to Algeria, to the Algerian campaign.
Aldous Cleaver.
For the Algerian
Prisoner.
And then the arrival in Switzerland. That's the time of Tim's life was in when he was on the run. For the first time, there was no professor looking down his neck, Nobody watching him at all. He was totally free, free cat. He had a wonderful time over here, but not so terrible.
He said, I met all the hippies in Switzerland, all 49 of them.
Was there a hand back there? Was someone waving? No. Please, Werner.
My name's Werner Pieper, and I was kind of Tim Leary for 5 minutes myself. Great honor, great pleasure. I'm a publisher. I reprinted Tim without permission in the 70s. When I got some money, I went to see him. When he got to Germany the first time, I was standing at the airport saying, I know that you're reprinted in Germany without permission. I'm one of the 2 guys who does it. So what are we doing now? He said, oh yeah, you're my friend because you understand what I mean. In later years I translated books, I published more of him, and one day he said, those Germans, I don't really understand them. Do they understand me? He doubted it. And then he said, he even gave it to me in printed, in written word, if you understand what I mean, you understand the Germans as a German, he thought. So it's an assumption. The Germans should know I allow you to write under my name. Which I did once.
What did you say? What did you say? It's in German.
It's in German.
Please.
I don't know Timothy Leary, obviously, but when I was doing research on Eleusis, there was a period where there was a group of individuals who took the potion for reasons of enjoyment and recreational purposes as opposed to the religious purposes. And they were, from my understanding, they were shunned and made outcast because of that. And what that said to me was that the people who ran Eleusis, they believed there was only one way. There was only one God, and there was only one way to enjoy this substance. And for all of Leary's high crimes and misdemeanors, I believe that his greatest contribution was being the one who took it out or took it away from the current keepers of the secrets, the current, there was only one way to do things. And I think that probably, at least in my mind, is what should be written and thought about most. He took it away from the people who said there's only one way to do that. And I don't mean any disrespect to Albert Hofmann or to anyone else, but I think he was parallel to people in the times of Eleusis and did it for a different purpose or a different way.
Yeah, I think that's true too.
That's very right. And the man's name was Alcibiades. He had been a military hero, and apparently they say he stole the kykeon, the sacred LSD-like substance, from the temple, and had private parties at his home in Athens. And he got busted and was sentenced to death. But because he'd been a military hero, they just gave him probation instead. Tim loved that story.
Mm-hmm. You know, this has a lot to do with the locus of authority. We were talking about this the other night. And Tim took the locus of authority from the university, from the government, and returned it to the people. You know, when I hear this criticism that Timothy Leary, stopped LSD research, I mean, look at this room. There's 200 LSD researchers right here. He made more LSD research than any government project will ever make.
Can I just add one thing about Alcibiades? He was the most talented person to follow after Pericles when he died. And when they got rid of Alcibiades, they lost their promise of the future, and the government fell.
He also tried to seduce Socrates, and he was apparently one of the most beautiful young men of Athens, which of course was homoerotic. On one level, people would be generally married and then take a younger boy lover with whom they would have the sort of pedagogic but eroticized relationship. And Alcibiades, in fact, threw himself naked into bed after a symposium with Socrates, and Socrates famously refused to physically touch him in any way, but this was an entire sort of inversion of the normal mode where the older lover would pursue the young boy. This was a complete inversion of this, with the older man was being pursued by the young man and rejecting his advice entirely.
How many people in here knew Timothy, had personal contact with him? Wow, that's real. I would have thought many more. Joanna, do you want to come up and say something? You are the only wife I haven't met yet. Joanna Harcourt Smith.
Thank you, Robert, for inviting me. I appreciate it. I want to say really that I'm very, very moved to meet Nick Sands, and for many personal reasons that we both know. And I'm especially very moved to meet Nick Sands because I think that in this place, in this temple at this time, we need to give a heart ovation to the people who gave their life force, like Nick Sands is one of the giants who gave their life to making this LSD that we are privileged to have taken. I myself am humbled to be sitting next to one of the most courageous LSD chemists of our time. So please join me.
Thank you, Joanna. That was very beautiful. That was very beautiful. I'm very grateful for that recognition. And I'd just like to say there was there was no choice that was really made. It was just being swept along, by the light, by, knowing that what I had seen had so freed me. I didn't have a choice. I had to just devote my life to providing the pure product that the laws had forbidden to be distributed. And we had to produce something to neutralize this fear that these toxic programs were actually a poison we were taking, because it was actually the conditioning that was the poison, and the light that we exposed ourselves to allowed us to have the freedom to free ourselves from this poison, and knowing that the LSD was pure and strong allowed us to have confidence that we could go ahead and clear out this toxic programming. And so there was no choice. It was, a great day to die, whatever came, It was just, devoting myself to this was what I had to do.
Now, did I have the time wrong? I thought we were supposed to be done by 6. Shall we continue? Well, absolutely. Well, this is our social experiment here, again, following on the heels of Timothy, to take the leaders out and turn it over to the people. So I'm very curious what...
We need a democratization of LSD.
Yes.
Please.
Not everyone. We need a democratization of LSD. The psycholytic model has its value, but it doesn't have a general application to people who can't afford $1,000 a session. And that's why we did it. We wanted everyone to be able to look at the light. And if there were some casualties, well, look at the record of alcohol and tobacco, which is sanctioned by all societies around the world.
Mm-hmm.
There's been no casualties of LSD, it's the conditioning that caused the casualties. LSD didn't cause the casualties, it was the conditioning.
Exactly.
No.
Exactly.
LSD didn't cause the casualties, it was the conditioning. And I wanted to say that I remember the worst trip I had. It was abominable. I mean, I was I was in the fetal position for 14 hours, and somehow I managed to get a grain of a grain of a grain in my brain that said, I've taken something, you know, and this is why I didn't go forever. But what was it? It was the pain of my childhood. It was all the pain that had never, ever had a chance to be exposed. And it freed that pain. You know, and I'm grateful for it. I'm as grateful for that as for the moments of seeing the ecstasies and the perfection of the universe.
Thank you.
We all have a responsibility to turn ourselves back into light. And that process, whether you have a psychiatrist present or not, is still up to us, into each person's individual courage and finding each person's road to their own impeccability. And so really, it's really an individual choice.
I had an opportunity to meet him when he was becoming a stand-up philosopher in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And would you say a little bit more about that time in his life when he was at a comedy club?
Yes, the first time I met him, he was doing his stand-up comedy. And I was very confused by the event myself because this was 1979, and here was Timothy Leary, and he seemed to be struggling, and he was trying to find out what his new role would be. It had only been a couple years that he was out of prison. He'd been kind of discredited by the counterculture, you know, that's all this business about him being a snitch, and he was kind of prancing on the stage. He couldn't really find his stride. But I was listening to his words, and he was doing a parody of the book of Genesis, and Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden being the prototype of the first drug bust, and you know, the importance of that biblical exegesis was really lost, I think, in the manner of delivery, and it was one of the first things that kind of set me off apart from him, you know. And his last few books are also these kind of, you know, hodgepodge sort of paste up things, and you have to really sort through it to see the genius in there. So you know, his whole life really, he was conditioned from a very early age to never take anything seriously. This was a monumental event at the very beginning of his life when his grandfather was dying. He said exactly those words: don't take anything too serious. Be one of a kind. Don't take anything too seriously. So his prankster was a method of his. You know, he was an excellent therapist, and this was just his way of dealing with what, you know, the enormity of the problem facing modern society. Again, with this rise of fascism, these guys saw what we're dealing with right now. These guys anticipated 40, 50 years ago. And this was just going to be his way of doing it as a jokester. There's a great tradition of that in shamanism, you know, to play tricks, and that was his way. Another metaphor I've heard used, Frank Barron used to say that the popularization of LSD was, they thought of it like the Boston Tea Party. You know, the Boston Tea Party was a very significant event at the beginning of the Revolutionary War in the United States. You know, a bunch of colonists dressed up as Indians and dumped tea in the harbor. And kind of, you know, battle lines were drawn, and the rest of the colonies came in, and that was, you know, that's what I think the '60s was. Yeah. Please.
I want to know opinion of Mr. Sanders. If we will have situation, the LSD will be legal. What is the optimal way of distribution LSD to people? Kmart or physicians?
I think in some created situation where there is running water, friendly hands, fish swimming, and people who are supportive and well experienced, a natural setting, lakes, swans, so a place like that, it should be distributed and turned on. This is what we were trying to create in Millbrook. under Timothy's leadership, and with Ralph and with Richard. And we did turn on thousands of people that way. They just streamed through Millbrook, and we turned them on, and I was busy in my laboratory, and Tim was busy talking and turning people on to, tune in, turn on, drop out, and all these wonderful slogans that he would invent. And it was a beautiful time. And they were having a discussion before, and people were saying, well, we didn't really notice that much when they made ecstasy illegal in the 80s. But I can tell you that when we were using LSD in the early 60s, before people knew anything about it, the experiences were much more ecstatic. And after they changed the laws, the dances became less spontaneous, the entire atmosphere became darker and heavier. So we need to return to this time of freedom.
But here's another thought I want to try out. You know, when we talk about the legalization of LSD or marijuana, and you know, one of the thoughts that comes up for me is that Christianity was a very powerful peace and love movement for the first couple hundred years, and it became so effective as a peace and love movement of the masses that the state eventually had to embrace it, and it became legal. It became the state religion of Rome. And at that point, I dare say, I hope I'm not offending anybody, but Christianity became one of the most destructive forces in the history of the world. So there's a sense I have that keeping psychedelic drugs in the underground, in the fertile, rich underground with the mystic outlaw artists, somehow protects it from, you know, if LSD becomes legal, then it becomes marketed by Lilly Pharmaceuticals, or, you know, and there's a whole karmic aspect and an alchemical aspect that I'm afraid gets lost. Now, I'm not advocating that people are prosecuted for this, but so, you know, and I think this may have been something at Eleusis that I respect. That Eleusis was you know, lasted for 2,000 years, and it was both, you know, it was sort of both legitimate, but it was also set apart. You know, it was outside of the society. You couldn't advertise what went on at Eleusis. You know, if they make LSD legal or marijuana legal, there's going to be commercials for it. You know, personally, I want my marijuana grown by an outlaw in the mountains. You know, I want Nick to be making it, and I think that's really important.
And that's what the native people do. And they've been doing it for thousands of years.
John?
For the upload, when you get caught.
Yes.
The price is not too good either.
Well, you know, I live in California, and there we have very severe drug laws and long prison sentences, and it's horrible. But, you know, in Switzerland here, this civilized country, it's correct me if I'm wrong, but marijuana is illegal, and LSD is illegal, but nobody's in jail for these things. You know, something like that. It's illegal, and it kind of forces the user to pay a little more attention to creating a sacred context, use them in secrecy, and this is important. Yeah. John. I'm sorry?
I think this creates paranoia in the user.
Well, you may be right.
Yes, the subject of Eleusis keeps coming up, and I wonder if I could say something about that as a testimonial of what I acquired and learned from Timothy Leary, because the two things are very much connected. First of all, I just want to say that I've spent 40 years of my life studying the Eleusinian mysteries. I've just written a book on them, which is coming out in July, about the entheogenic sacraments of the Eleusinian mysteries. And there's one thing that I would like to point out, which is just my understanding of them. There was nothing in the policy of the Eleusinian initiates that forbid people to have the entheogen, because it's known that thousands of people came to Eleusis and partook of the entheogen. So it's in my mind, a little bit incorrect to say that Alcibiades, and this is an old story that I don't really want to go into that much, but it's incorrect to say that he took it away from the Eleusinian initiates and brought it to the public. It was always open available to everyone. If you were an honest person and not a murderer, you could partake of the mysteries. But what the Eleusinian initiates did, and this relates to what I learned from Timothy Leary, is that they preserved among themselves a very rigorous discipline of sacramental practice. You could take the entheogen without doing the sacramental practice. But if you wanted to join the initiates, you would then take the entheogen in a highly disciplined path of sacramental practice. So it was one or the other. It wasn't one or the other. It was both things. And I was very, very fortunate because in the 60s, when I was first given LSD, and then I purchased LSD, it was given to me by people who came to me and they said, yes, LSD, we're talking about the revolution, and we had the usual talk, but they gave me a very important piece of information along with that Sandoz tablet. They said, have you seen The Psychedelic Experience by Albert, Leary, and Metzner? I said, no, what is this? And they said, this is a book which translates the Tibetan Book of the Dead into a psychedelic guide. And they said to me that anyone, of course, can take LSD. It's out now, and many, many people are taking it. But if you want to take it in a practice, in a sacramental path, rather than in what I would call a kind of free-form recreational way, which is fun, then take it with this guide and use this guide and find your way to the clear light. And I was so fortunate that in the first transactions I had in New York City, when I purchased LSD, and when I gave someone a $5 bill, and they gave me a Sandoz tablet, and they closed it in my hand, and they looked me in the eyes, and they said, may you find the clear light. And that, for me, kept me on a certain path with the LSD experience, which I think is the same path that the initiates of Eleusis were on. And so that's what I acquired from Leary. That was one of his earliest works. You don't hear it mentioned very much anymore, but it was, to me, a tremendously important work, The Psychedelic Experience, and it was a great guide, too.
One short comment here I'd like to make is that one of the most pernicious examples of reframing was Nancy Reagan's "Just Say No to Drugs." This is the most idiotic thing, and Timothy reframed it, "Just say no to drugs, K-N-O-W." But we actually, among ourselves, we don't refer to these sacraments as drugs. We refer to them as sacraments, and that is an intention, and that is a reframing, that is a framework, which is very important for entering into the sacred space, which is beyond laws, beyond forms that keep people locked unconsciously for the reasons of social survival. But we've come full circle. I think we're past that now, and I think we can take our own responsibility not to harm and to be impeccable in this modern world.
Thank you.
Time is over.
I have a question. Entheogens is a substance that can free the God within. How do you call a substance that keep your God within in prison?
Well, Carl, I'm going to turn that question over to you. We need a new word here. What's the opposite of an entheogen?
Antidepressant.
This man is saying that an entheogen is a substance that frees the God within. What is the word for a substance that keeps the God within? That keeps the God within.
Alcohol.
Something
It's
that
time.
An entheocide.
An entheocide. There we go. Let's not have many of those. That's called television. You know, it occurred to me that this is probably the largest gathering of psychedelicists ever, right? I mean, I organized a conference that had about 800 or 900 people come to it in Santa Cruz, California in 1980. And then there was another one that also had several hundred people, but I think there's about 1,500 people here. And I was searching my mind for what other field, where else in anthropology or in religious studies or in medicine has there ever been a gathering? We're quite a diverse group of people here, but we're all gathered, I dare say, with this kind of experiential connection to the holy other. And I was thinking, where has this ever happened? And I'm wondering if it has ever happened since Eleusis. Did 1,000 people showed up at Eleusis, and according to the legends and the myth, they saw the light. This is quite remarkable, and I think. Nick.
What about what?
Thank you. Yes, I guess that would do it. That would be it also. But here we are, very explicitly, honoring Albert Hofmann. I'm so glad to see this, these tributes to Tim that have been forthcoming from the very beginning of this conference. And the one bit of Leary bashing there was in the New York Times was the New York Times putting words in Albert's mouth. So this is, maybe we're turning. Yes.
Actually, I'm Swiss, and I saw that article in the New York Times and the internet, and it says, well, they went and visited Albert Hofmann in the Swiss alpine village of Burg, and this is like about 5 miles from here. This is the Swiss Alps for the New York Times. I mean, that tells you something about the standard.